Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session of the 2022 Higher Education Climate Leadership Summit. My name is Nicole Tirico. I'm a program director at the Intentional Endowments Network, and I'm going to cover a few logistics before we dive in here today. Following our land acknowledgement statement at the opening of the summit yesterday, we'd like to again recognize the long-standing history of colonialism that has brought us to reside on Indigenous lands and reflect on our place within that history. We've shared the link to our land acknowledgement resource page in the chat, so you can learn more about our journey and the actions we're taking to meaningfully support Indigenous communities across our organizations. With this in mind, I acknowledge that I'm joining you all today from Western Massachusetts, the ancestral homelands of the Mohican people, the Indigenous people of this land. And I invite the speakers of this session, as well as our participants, to, as you introduce yourselves, kindly state the lands you're calling in from. So for those that haven't participated in sessions like this in the past, or those that didn't join our lightning round yesterday, this is the second lightning round presentation we'll be hosting at this year's summit. During the session, you'll hear 6 presentations happening back to back over the course of the hour. Presenters will each share in 7 minutes an overview of their topic and how other participants can take action. And given the quick nature of these presentations, there won't be time for audience Q&A following each presentation. Instead, presenters and attendees will transition from this session to the Meetup Lounge at 2 Eastern, where presenters will host a networking table on their presentation topic and have the opportunity to answer your questions and engage in conversation with up to 30 attendees at a time. So we'll reiterate this again at the end of the session, but to make that transition, once the lightning rounds are ended, we'll ask each of you to switch from the agenda tab to the Meetup Tables tab in the navigation bar, find the table named after the presentation you'd like to learn more about, hover over a chair and hit the join button. So this session is going to be another great informative session with a lot of quick information given. But before we hand it over to our first presenter, Steve Muzzy, my colleague at the Second Nature team, has an exciting announcement to share.
Thank you, Nicole. I am Steve Muzzy, Senior Manager of Climate Programs at Second Nature, and I am calling in from the ancestral lands of the Nipmuc, Wabanaki, and Pocumtuck people, and I reside in the Connecticut River Valley of Western Massachusetts. And I get to follow up on yesterday's announcement of Acceleration Fund recipients with another example of direct campus support. The Solutions Center Pro Bono Consulting opportunity was first announced in the fall of 2020 and is made possible by our partners Brailsford and Dunleavy and Customer First Renewables. Through this program, B&D and CFR provide up to $10,000 in technical and advisory support for each campus. B&D provides climate action planning support that outlines a technically and financially feasible roadmap towards carbon reduction goals. And CFR provides support in identification and implementation of renewable energy solutions for each campus. So the Pro Bono Consulting opportunity is an exclusive benefit for Climate Leadership Network signatories and University Climate Change Coalition members. So congratulations to the Pro Bono Consulting Round 2 6 campuses. And I am now going to pass it off to our first speaker, Jim Beck.
Hi, folks. I am going to bring up a slide deck, which I'll hopefully access here. Great. Good afternoon. My name is Jim Beck. I'm a Senior Vice President with Locus Impact Investing. We're a nonprofit RIA solely dedicated to helping clients realize their place-based impact investing priorities. I'm also the Executive Director of the Community Investment Guarantee Pool, or CIGP, which is what I'm going to talk to you about today. CIGP is an impact investment vehicle that issues financial guarantees to support equity and innovation in the community development marketplace with a thematic focus on affordable housing, small business, and climate change. I am sitting in my family's living room in territory that is now known as Brooklyn, New York, but which is also the traditional homeland of the Lenape peoples. So this is going to challenge my ability to speak and move slides at the same time. So you'll have to bear with me. So I have 3 things that I want to just quickly touch on and then elaborate on at the breakout table. First, I want to tell you about how unfunded guarantees are an underutilized but high potential tool for mission-driven investors to unlock capital to further climate solutions. I also want to talk about how our model, CIGP's approach to guarantees, is one about scaling the availability and use of guarantees as an impact investing tool. And then finally, I want to talk a bit about how our guarantees seek to align with and support racial equity efforts and focus on low-income communities within the climate change space. So, as we all know, climate change is an existential threat. And as the Intentional Endowment Network rightfully calls out, it's a crisis that disproportionately impacts low-income communities and households of color. This is true not just in terms of direct consequences, but also indirect implications of trying to transition away from carbon. Here are some of the indicators that kind of sourced from IEN's own website, as well as Berkeley Labs, around some of the disparate impacts and how race and income intersect with climate change. Part of the just released UN IPCC report, we have about 3 years to meaningfully bend the curve on emissions to stay below the 2 degrees Celsius threshold. And obviously, this is going to require massive investment from all sources to back solutions and mitigation efforts, most of which we already have. By some estimates, it's $1 trillion annually, kind of around the world, $250 billion just for the US alone. But also, as IEN recognizes, these investments need to apply an equity lens and utilize community development channels to ensure that the structural inequalities are not perpetuated. In this regard, we think that unfunded guarantees are a really undervalued, underutilized financial tool that's really well suited for mission-motivated investors with endowments or strong balance sheets that can be used to catalyze more capital for climate change solutions that benefit low-income and communities of color. So just one example, and this is based on kind of ratios that we've experienced thus far in the guarantee pool, is that the aggregate endowments of IEN members total to about 30 billion, kind of activating about 1% of that towards guarantees, towards unfunded guarantees, could catalyze an additional 1.5 billion towards climate solutions. So really quickly, what are guarantees? Guarantees are basically contractual obligations that have one party obligating themselves to make a payment to another party when certain conditions are met. Similar to home insurance, if there's a fire, the insurance company makes a payment to the homeowner or to the lender. In the context of climate solutions, the guarantee might apply to a construction loan for a renewable energy project, which is sort of the picture diagram that we're seeing here. The neat thing about unfunded guarantees is that they're actually not funded by the guarantor. Nothing is funded until the guarantee is actually triggered. So at the same time, the guarantor's financial strength is being used to backstop initiatives, programs, or organizations that otherwise would be unable to move forward because of risk concerns. So the endowment can continue to generate financial returns by staying invested in its CIO strategies while also generating significant impact returns through the guarantees. And from a higher ed and IEN member perspective, I would say that financial guarantees can also be used to help catalyze capital for net zero transition within their own local communities and reinforce community partnerships or engagement priorities that they may have. And I'll get into that with one of the case studies at the breakout table. So what is CIGP doing about guarantees? Well, we're excited about our approach because we're trying to bring some efficiencies towards the use of guarantees. In kind of launching CIGP about 2 years ago, we surfaced a lot of hesitation amongst investors that would otherwise be interested in guarantees from standpoint of having to have a specialized capacity to source, structure, and manage guarantees. And so by taking a multi-investor, multi-asset approach, CIGP, the guarantee pool, we're trying to bring a more kind of efficient way for investors to add guarantees to their impact portfolio. So just to kind of wrap up here, we've been, as I said, we've been operational about 2 years, having launched just before the pandemic. Our current investors and our kind of initial cohort of investors consist of mostly philanthropic impact investors and range from community foundations, family offices to national private foundations. We've issued about 17 million of guarantees. They've been in the housing and small business space. We currently have a pipeline of about 130 million of guarantee opportunities. The largest component of that is actually climate. That's been a recent development. And we're very excited to kind of move forward on several of those opportunities. And I am looking forward to sharing more about CIGP at the breakout table. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. We'll now hand it over to Marion and John, who will be sharing about campus emission reduction at Wells College.
Hi there. Gonna pull up some slides here real quickly. All righty. All right, I'm assuming folks can see this here. Great. All right, well, it's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. My name is John Jackson. I'm calling in from San Francisco, which is the ancestral lands of the Ohlone people. And today with me, I have Marion Brown from Wells College. She is the director of the Wells College Center for Sustainability. And we're going to be talking today about using our case study to really demonstrate how colleges and universities can overcome some of the key barriers to implementing impactful decarbonization projects. So with that, I'll hand it over to Marion to kick us off.
Great, thanks, John. First of all, Wells College acknowledges that we're located on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Cayuga Nation, one of the 6 nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, sometimes referred to as the Iroquois Confederacy. Wells College is a very small private liberal arts college in upstate New York. Founded over 150 years ago, our campus is comprised of a mix of building types and vintages, with half of them now over 100 years old. So modernizing our buildings to better support current educational and residential needs, as well as making them more resource efficient, is an ongoing challenge. Wells lacks access to natural gas, so our central steam plant combusts propane. Next slide, John. So our facilities leadership has addressed efficiency improvements where operating funds permitted, mainly tackling low-hanging fruit measures. Over the years, we undertook several energy studies that identified some high-impact measures to both improve occupant comfort and reduce utility consumption. But like many institutions, probably on this presentation call, Wells is financially resource constrained and averse to assuming long-term debt. So the upfront cost to implement those measures was a showstopper for us. Enter Metris Energy and their sustainable energy as a service financial model.
Thanks, Marion. So now I'll touch a bit on what we do here at Metris and how we help Wells overcome some of the financial barriers that Marion just touched on. So at our core, Metris develops, finances, and manages sustainable energy solutions. And that's really anything on the energy efficiency side that saves electricity, natural gas, or water, and also anything on the clean energy side as well. So solar PV assets, storage assets. And we do so through sustainable energy as a service, which is a mouthful for sure, but really at its core, it's a off-balance sheet pay-for-performance mechanism that has some key benefits for end users. And so I'll touch on a few of the key benefits here. The first one's no capital outlay. So Metris funds projects 100% upfront, allowing colleges to preserve their capital for core business operations such as educating students and providing services. Also, it's a off-balance sheet accounting treatment. So we're preserving debt capacity of end users, allowing them not to take on additional debt to really implement impactful decarbonization projects. So next, I'll get into a bit about how we worked with Wells to implement the project and fund the project, and kind of our similar process we go through with other end users. So it really starts from the beginning with identifying potential measures on the efficiency and clean energy side, and then also working to select the best contractors and subcontractors for the job. We also cover the project development costs during the development of the project. So things like preliminary audits, investment grade audits, et cetera. Once a project's been identified, efficiency measures are ready to be installed, PV panels are ready to be put up. We fund the project during construction and retain ownership of the assets. This helps keep the project off balance sheet. And then once the project's actually implemented, we switch the light switch, for example, and go into the operational phase of the project. And here's where we're measuring the savings output of efficiency assets and the clean energy output from clean energy assets. And colleges are paying only for those measured savings in generation. And we do this through an annual measurement and verification process. And then payments are trued up so that savings or payments are really matched to the actual savings. Also provide ongoing maintenance and monitoring services throughout the project. And yeah, so we worked through this process with Wells, and the project's been implemented for about 2 years now, and it's been operating really efficiently. So I'll hand it over to Marion to talk a bit about their greenhouse gas emissions journey and the project.
Great. So Wells was an early signatory to the climate commitment, setting us on a trajectory to become carbon neutral by mid-century. And through the good work by operational managers, we've become more resource conserving and efficient. We've experienced significant emissions declines, mostly in scope 2 and 3. Our most stubborn energy consumption area has been in building heating. We are pleased that the measures implemented under the Metris program to address building envelope and steam trap issues has helped us experience some significant reductions in scope 1 emissions for the first time.
Great, thanks, Marion. So I'll leave us with this last kind of overview case study slide, and really just kind of breaks down the project. So the project itself was really efficiency focused and looking at measures ranging from LED fixtures to more industrial measures such as steam trap repair and replacement. Metris funded the project for about $2.15 million. Expected annual CO2 savings in metric tons around 657. And we have 2 M&V reports that are showing the project's operating at that level. And then total annual savings from a dollar perspective was around $229,000 annually. And then contract term was 14 years roughly. So excited to chat more with all of you at our discussion table, answer any questions, talk about the project. Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, and I would just add that Wells is very pleased with our partnership with Metris. Given how well this program has worked for us, we encourage you to investigate whether sustainable energy as a service could work for your campus.
Thanks, Marianne.
Thanks.
Thank you, Marianne and John. We'll now hand it over to Martin, who manages AGF's sustainable investing strategies. Martin, if you are presenting, your camera and microphone are off.
My apologies. I'll rewind. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
All right, perfect. Yeah, thanks for the brief introduction. My name is Martin Groskopf. I'm a portfolio manager with AGF Investment Management based in Toronto. And I run a strategy that has been around for a few decades now, focused on sustainability, based off some of the principles from the United Nations that came out actually with the Brundtland Commission report back in the late 80s, so way before the Sustainable Development Goals were launched more recently. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the context for sustainable investments in the market today, specifically around the topic of greenflation, which has become quite an issue, really, when you look at some of the context that we're seeing today. Before I do that, I just want to recognize that where I am here in Toronto, I'm sitting in the traditional territory of many of the First Nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, as well as the Wendat peoples. And of course, Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And I'd also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 that was signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Williams Treaty that was signed with multiple Mississaugas and Chippewa bands. So with that, I will get into the topic that I mentioned, which is greenflation. And really why this has become an issue is clearly, you know, we are in a period of significant inflation that consumers, investors obviously are quite concerned about. And the question is, how much has recent green policy related to climate or other issues, as well as the flows we've been seeing into sustainability products over the last number of years, assisted really with this context of inflation? And I'll talk about a couple of the dynamics that we're seeing there. But certainly those two factors are the ones that are most often noted as a critique of green policy, that ESG flows have impaired access to capital for carbon intensive industries. And of course, now we're seeing a need, at least short term, for more carbon intensity with fossil fuel production. And secondly, that green policy is wreaking havoc on the availability of key inputs, and that might lead to inflation over time. So just think of that battery supply chain and what's happening with lithium or cobalt, or for that matter, even, you know, more ubiquitous materials like nickel, and what that might mean for pricing of electrification as we go along. And certainly then there's the element of things like carbon pricing, and perhaps, you know, permitting delays on mining projects that's also been raised as a problem today. So, you know, certainly in terms of the flows we've seen in the last number of years into the markets, most of you know about the principles for responsible investment. There's over 120 trillion signed onto those principles. And really that has allowed the market to adopt ESG as one of the focal points. It's been one of the fastest growing areas of fund flows in the market, and we think certainly that's a good thing. However, the thesis is that perhaps that's coming with those constraints, where investors are now less likely to fund businesses, for instance, that are more carbon intensive or have higher water intensity, or for that matter, other environmental issues like the waste management that companies might have in place. And certainly, from our perspective, we view that as kind of a tenuous argument, because certainly what we have viewed over the last number of years is a very broad distribution in what's considered an ESG portfolio. So unlike a strategy like the one that I manage, which is very focused on thematics around sustainability, energy, water, waste, and health, many ESG funds can actually own anything. And you'll see certainly from the top 10 holdings that some of those portfolios have, that they own, many of the FANGs. In fact, many of them own traditional energy companies. You'll see companies like Exxon in some of the top holdings of conventional ESG ETFs. So the argument that there's a constraint being placed on capital and that that's inflationary in some sectors doesn't really seem to hold water if ESG portfolios actually are not really defined well enough that they are restricting capital. We're not seeing a lot of exclusions in many of those products that have received a lot of the flows. Another aspect that I think needs to be considered is that of the ESG rating companies. So two of those companies started in Toronto many years ago. It's Michael Jancy Research Associates and Matthew Kernan started a business called Innovest that became part of MSCI's ESG rating methodology. And when we look at the alignment of some of the key rating providers from an ESG perspective, there isn't great alignment between them. So the correlation isn't too high on any particular company that's being looked at. So again, we're not seeing that, even the process of assessing risks or opportunities from an ESG perspective is actually crowding capital into certain areas and detracting from other areas. You'd actually expect to see much more agreement between those research companies on what makes, an environmentally sound investment, as an example. But there seems to be, quite a diversity of opinions in that regard. So correlations, again, between the providers, not lending a lot of credence to the argument of a constraint of capital. And then, of course, we get into the issue of environmental policy. And, I think people often forget that environmental policy has really been tightening in terms of its expectation over the last 40 years or so, or even more, perhaps 50 years. I mean, if you go back to the publication of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in 1962, that was really the start of the stricter environmental regulation. So when we look at that long period of time, it was not actually inflationary. We see technology continuing to improve in terms of the pricing of things like solar and wind panels. And so it's not, necessarily inflationary. And so while we're in a tough situation right now for many consumers, there are so many myriad of issues causing that. We certainly don't think that it's necessarily our ambition to transition our economy towards greener objectives that's causing that issue. And so I'm going to stop there and certainly look forward to discussing these issues in the breakout session with those of you who are interested. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. We'll now hand it over to Stephanie from Northern Arizona University.
Good morning or afternoon, everybody. I'm Stephanie Mayer. I'm an assistant director at the Center for Ecosystem Science and Society at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff. I help with day-to-day operations along with a small but mighty team of administrators. And today I'm here to talk to you about event planning and execution, which is a really fun and big part of my job. Also in the audience, we have Kate Peterson. She's another assistant director at our department, and she specializes in communications and outreach. She's going to join us during the meetup section and has been heavily involved in planning and executing all of our events. Northern Arizona University sits at the base of the San Francisco Peaks on homeland sacred to Native Americans throughout the region. We honor their past, present, and future generations who have lived here for millennia and will forever call this place home. My portion of this lightning round is a bit of a crash course in what happens after somebody says, we should hold a conference. The The event that I'm going to be talking about particularly today came out of the fact that ECOS team members have worked with our climate action planning team for years now. The process at NAU has been involved in a lot of fits and starts over the last 10 years or so. We have a great sustainability office, and it's just faced a lot of challenges. We've had transitions in administration and investment, and all of the things that I'm sure a lot of your institutions are facing as well. As our department sort of discussed how we could be more involved in helping push this forward, people started talking about learning from other institutions' successes, struggles, and of course, any abject failures. And at some point, somebody said, we should hold a conference. The result of those conversations was the Bumpy Road to Net Zero, Paths to Carbon Neutrality in Uncertain Times. Whenever you start planning an event, you're going to ask yourself a lot of questions that will influence the format and your decision-making processes for the rest of it. Some of those things are, who is your audience? What do you want them to learn? What resources do you already have available? And what resources do you need to be able to pull this off? And these are just some core questions among a host of other considerations. For the Bumpy Road, when we talked about our audience, we were really looking at higher education administrators, staff, faculty, and students. So it was a very, very focused group of people. That also influenced the format of the event, because when we thought about what they could commit to attending, we made an assumption that they would be able to participate in this as part of their workday. This was also in November 2020, which was about 8 months into the pandemic when things had transitioned completely online. We asked ourselves, what do we really want people to learn? And we discussed a lot of things about sort of overviews of higher education climate action planning, which of course was selfishly our motivation for hosting this conference. We really wanted to answer those questions. Additionally, we wanted to look at possible solutions to campus carbon neutrality and decarbonization. So we wanted to bring together people who had actually implemented these projects and look specifically at what they did and what worked. A foundational piece of all of this is relationship building. So we had workshops on that as well. A lot of sustainability work on college campuses is about leveraging resources and building those networks and communication groups. When Kate and I first started talking about this and we looked at what resources we had available, at first we really didn't have a dedicated budget. It was mostly Kate and me, as well as a couple of faculty who were instrumental in developing the curriculum and inviting speakers, including Dr. George Koch and a couple of others at our department. We decided to use Zoom, and at first we thought, oh, we have this great resource. We have the whole Zoom platform available to us through NAU, but we quickly realized that there was a fancier version of Zoom that we wanted to use, but that we would need a budget to pay for. So when we looked at the resources we had available and what we needed, we noticed that there was a gap. And we went back to our director and were able to talk to him about that. The other big resource that you need for any event is staff time. And we really encourage people to think critically about their capacity to be able to implement events at the beginning and sort of think about what this means for you. The results and the answers to all of those questions were that we developed a fully remote curriculum. We had 9 sessions in mostly panel formats, and this took place over 3 half days in November of 2020. Kate is actually going to go ahead and drop a link to the agenda into the chat if you want to go ahead and take a look at that. Once we had the format set, obviously we needed to recruit speakers. The first question that you always wind up asking is, who are the experts in this? We wanted less to look at sort of who is writing papers on these issues and more who is doing the work, who has been implementing climate action planning, carbon neutrality and decarbonization programs at their universities, and what can we learn from them? This involved, of course, talking to a lot of practitioners. One of the challenges that we really ran into with this was that we wanted to create a diverse list of speakers who would contribute to these panels. But while we were highly attuned to this, organizing the event around universities that were innovating in these 9 domains presented a huge challenge to us. We wound up with a set of predominantly white campus decision makers. This highlights the need for diversity in hiring and leadership cultivation, as we see that increased representation in sustainability offices may also reveal additional systemic gaps on our campuses. We really encourage participants who are looking at organizing these kinds of events to think really creatively about recruitment of diverse speakers. Another thing to be aware of when you're recruiting these speakers is to be aware of your own biases. So when you think about, oh, who do I know who's doing this work? That's really going to limit your speaker pool. The people that we know tend to look like us. They tend to have similar backgrounds, and we know them through sort of these communication networks. So we really, again, encourage you to think very broadly about this, and where you recruit your speakers is a really, really big part of making your event a success. Our final speaker list actually included Tim from Second Nature, as this organization is one of the biggest contributors nationally to moving these issues forward. We also had college and university sustainability office representatives. They're called a variety of things all over the country, and we have many of them here today and this week. We also included college and university administrators and student leaders, which was a really, really important part of this to us. To make sure that everybody was ready for their speaking engagement, we recruited moderators for each panel, and our moderators went beyond introducing folks and facilitating Q&A. They were able to ask their own questions, so we had some experts on as moderators for our panels. We also facilitated calls that took place before the event so that panels could meet one another and discuss their contributions. The event brought over 130 participants together over the course of the 3 days, and our evaluations came back very strong. We did, of course, have a lot of struggles and things that we would do differently. And we really encourage you to come and join us at our meetup table, not only to ask questions about the bumpy road to net zero, but also to the other events that we've hosted. We hosted Climate 2020, 7 Generations for Arizona, which was an in-person event, which had very different answers to the questions that I prompted earlier in this session. So thank you very much for everyone for being here, and I will turn it back to Second Nature.
Thank you, Stephanie. We'll now hand it over to Andy, the CEO of As You Sow.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much. Our offices and my home are located in the Holchin and Yelamu territory, known as the San Francisco East Bay, on the unceded territories of the Chochenyo and Ramaytush Ohlone peoples. I'm going to talk today about the power of shareholder advocacy. As You Sow is a nonprofit. We've been around for 30 years, and we focus on corporate accountability through the lens of shareholders. So we engage companies and talk to them about environmental, social, and governance practices. So we do this. We start with a lot of research. We look at companies and we develop what are called key performance indicators. So different methodologies, metrics that a company can use to evaluate themselves. An example would be after the George Floyd murders, we looked and said, how do we get companies to start to work on eradication of systemic racism? How do we measure the companies? And there were no real measures. And so we assembled a group of people who were really quite expert in this area and developed what became 57 different key performance indicators. We then had our researchers look at the Russell 1000, so looking at 1,000 companies across these different things, what the companies said, what the companies do, how they implement change, what are their policies, what are their practices, how are they perceived, and how are they internally and externally. So what this led to is a scorecard where we could say a company scored a 3 and another company, their direct competitor, might have scored a 25. So we then call up companies, we send them letters, we sit down with them and we say, look, you have this risk, this is systemic risk. And as shareholders, we have the right we have legal standing to talk about things that are material and material risk. So in that case, we would say, these are the 5 things you could do to become competitive. And this is something that will be harmful to our brand and harmful to our competitive nature. So in this process, we work through these issues with companies. So we work on issues including climate change. So we work with big oil, utilities, banks, insurance companies, pipeline companies, oil field services, and environmental health. We work on food systems. So we work on pesticides in the food system. An example would be glyphosate, Roundup, that's sprayed on wheat, oats, and beans by major companies. An example, it's Kellogg's. They were spraying, as all companies were doing, spraying this chemical on all of their wheat, oats, and beans, and going right into the food system, essentially poisoning their customers. And after conversations with them and showing them how they scored poorly on this scorecard, they adopted a new policy that they were not going to allow this to happen through their entire supply chain. So it affects hundreds of farmers. General Mills adopted a regenerative agriculture policy. So that's how we work. That is the power that shareholders have. Now, oftentimes you talk to a company and they go, yes, let's go fix it. Sometimes they don't. Last year, we had 188 engagements on issues, as I mentioned, climate, environmental health, work on ocean plastics, as well as racial justice, diversity, equity, inclusion, wage justice. And so 188 engagements, 102 companies said, this is great information, let's go fix this. 86 did not. So we filed what's called a shareholder resolution. It's a very formal document that's filed 6 months in advance of the annual meeting. It's 500 words. And we don't own shares. And so we engage with other groups. So one group, Warren Wilson College, they own equities, they own shares in a lot of companies. And so they authorized us to file on their behalf. And then we go and we write the shareholder resolution, we file it, we take it to the company. Sometimes the company will try to get it blocked at the SEC. There's a lot of legal defense involved. And eventually, though, the company either settles. So of those 86, about half of them said, okay, let's go do this. And we created a withdrawal agreement. And the other half went to a vote. Of those votes, we had 8 majority votes. Now, these are non-binding votes, so the company isn't forced to do it. But when you get a 98% vote, an 86% vote, like we did at DuPont, the company, they have to listen. Their shareholders are saying, we really think this is important. And if they don't, it shows that their board is not paying attention. And oftentimes the next year, you will find people voting against the people on the board. So it's really about listening to your shareholders and working with them. So again, we work with organizations like Warren Wilson College. There's other endowments that we work with, and other just people who own shares. So this is the process that we do. We've been doing it for 30 years. We've had a great deal of success. It takes a lot of tenacity, and I'm happy in the breakout rooms to get into some details about some of the work we're doing. We currently have 80 resolutions that we filed this year. There's another 20 that we're going to be filing in the next few months. And these can range across all kinds of different companies, all kinds of different issues. But the most important thing to realize is that we're there to help the companies. It is not oppositional. We sit down with the company and we say, look, we've identified material risk and we have a solution. We have a way for you to actually improve. And so that's why the conversations go well, because the companies want to improve, or some of them do, some of them don't. And those get a little bit more, well, it just escalates. We escalate to the shareholder resolution and we escalate beyond. So that's how shareholder advocacy works. Another thing that we do that's really interesting is we look inside of mutual funds. Most people own mutual funds in their retirement accounts. So if you're in a school, you own a 403B account. And if you are in a company, you own a 401k account. And so those are generally invested in what are called target date funds, which are a fund of funds. If you actually look inside of what those funds hold, a mutual fund is a basket of funds, you're going to find a lot of fossil fuels, deforestation, private prisons, all kinds of things, weapons that may be counter to a person's individual values. And so we're encouraging all people who have retirement accounts to take a deep dive. We have a tool called Invest Your Values. It's at investyourvalues.org. You can look deeply inside your funds, what you hold, because most people are not really even aware. So I'm going to wrap up. Happy to talk about all of this a little bit later. And thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Andy. We'll now hand it over to our final presenter, Bree, who was having some technical issues earlier, so hopefully they are straightened out, and she'll be sharing how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with the Better Climate Challenge.
Thank you. I think it's working successfully now. So I'll go ahead and pull up some slides here. All right. Okay, perfect. Well, great to be with you all today. My name is Bree Colin, and I serve as a fellow in the Building Technologies Office at the U.S. Department of Energy. I'm excited to connect with you today to talk more about our new initiative called the Better Climate Challenge. And this was recently rolled out by the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, as well as additional members of President Biden's cabinet, including National Climate Advisor Gina McCarthy a couple weeks ago. And there's no deadline to join, so I wanted to share more information about it today. What this initiative is really trying to get at is supporting organizations across sectors in getting to the how that they're meeting their emissions reduction goals. So we know that many wherever folks are on their pathways in addressing their greenhouse gas emissions, whether they've set goals or working towards it, we want to really help support in creating that actionable pathway. So we're challenging organizations to set ambitious portfolio-wide near-term operational emission reduction goals to demonstrate ultimately how leaders are measurably taking these steps to address climate change. And this government platform is really helpful in offering various lenses of additional transparency, accountability, as well as unique technical assistance that we can bring from the DOE to support others in their work. We want to be able to provide opportunities for collaboration in identifying decarbonization pathways and ultimately providing national recognition for the leadership across the US economy within various sectors. So the various parameters of this specific program are a reduction in Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions portfolio-wide of at least 50% in the next 10 years. We're asking that no offsets count towards this 50%, but you're welcome to include them above and beyond the 50%. RECs and PPAs, VPPAs, those power purchase agreements are fine to count towards that 50%. And organizations, when they sign on to partner, would set a baseline for the purpose of this program up to 5 years back from their join date. So we're really trying to encourage the more recent the baseline, the better, to promote action in the present. Folks that join also, we encourage them to establish an absolute target, but intensity-based targets will be accepted on a case-by-case basis. And because we are the Department of Energy, we also ask for folks to set energy efficiency targets that contribute towards that 50% emissions reductions, because we know that energy efficiency is a crucial strategy when pursuing decarbonization plans that's very impactful and cost-effective. A few other items that when partners commit that they could take advantage of is participating in working groups to discuss specific barriers, exchange best practices, and identify solutions. And these specific topics for working groups are being developed, especially in these first couple of years. And so as folks join on and become partners, the conversations that we have really go towards informing those working groups across the next decade. I'd also like to expand a bit more on some of the unique technical assistance that we can provide for organizations that join. We want to be able to help support partners as they're working towards measuring, tracking, and improving their portfolio-wide greenhouse gas performance. So say if folks had certain projects where they wanted technical assistance and feedback on various building science topics around lighting, HVAC, building envelope, we could utilize our suite of national labs and connect you with technology research teams that specialize in those various topics. And that could be really helpful to crowdsource ideas and get to think through what are some additional areas that we could be brainstorming as folks are either planning new buildings or renovating existing buildings. We want to be able to also collect and share out best practices in the form of case studies. So just today in this past hour, I've been really inspired by the work going on at Wells College, Northern Arizona University, and those are exactly the types of stories that we love to highlight and publish in a public manner. And so we want to be able to really drive and market leadership so others can help and replicate those best practices out in the field. So we encourage also opportunities for facilitating peer-to-peer learning among partners, and we like to convene folks to have informal discussions as well as some more formal discussions at our annual summit conference. And those are great opportunities to really share out what stories others have to tell. And then again, we want to be able to provide national recognition for progress that folks are making for milestones along the way, as well as when they achieve that goal ultimately, where we roll out the red carpet and we have a lot of other additional opportunities for partnering with our communications team as well as organizations communications team. Again, some of those core components I just want to highlight again of this program are transparency and accountability, being able to partner with a government agency in this work to share out what leadership activities organizations and universities are taking. So there is an annual data reporting element to this program. We've worked really hard to align with existing reporting structures out there so it's not an added burden. And so as folks are doing their greenhouse gas inventories, we're really pulling from similar pieces of information that's already being collected, and we're sharing that out in a public-facing profile so others can learn from universities' emissions reduction strategies, saying like what are pieces that they're prioritizing and can learn from them. And again, technical assistance, I also like to note that the conversations that we have with partners really go also towards informing actions in various offices across the agency. So a lot of people come to the Better Buildings program and they want to hear of what are examples in the field of barriers and hurdles and how have people overcome it, and maybe what are some technology gaps. So this is informing research and development of the agency overall. So I'd just like to encourage just overall engagement with the Better Buildings program in general too, because the information that we gain from universities and other organizations are really valuable for the agency's direction. And then again, being able to collaborate towards demonstrating the pathways is really crucial additional pillar. So why join? I know yesterday I heard a lot of mentions too of the recent IPCC report. I think it's just continuing to highlight the urgency of these issues. And so being able to offer the unique assistance that we can at the DOE is something that we want to contribute towards really making market improvement in battling the climate crisis and driving market transformation to catalyze continued work in emissions reduction field. So we want to be able to offer a suite of technical assistance and then opportunities for peer-to-peer engagement and recognition to showcase the innovation results that are being really trailblazers that we know that the higher education sphere is. And so we want to be able to note those opportunities for recognition. And I want to highlight too, there are over 100 partners that have joined to date, and our few higher ed institutions here. We have Colorado State University, University of Virginia, Pace University, Bard College, and University of Chicago. So we're looking to add more and work more closely with partners in this area. And then our allies of the program, also want to specifically note Second Nature here, who is hosting our conference and our summit this week. They're a really valued partner in this initiative, and APA and ASHE actually just joined this morning. So we're excited to really join more closely in our higher education sphere. And then finally, if folks want to chat more with me at my roundtable, I am excited to connect with folks and talk more about this program going forward. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm really invigorated by our conversations that we've had so far at the conference.
Thank you, Bree, and all of our fantastic speakers over the course of this session. We will all now transition from this session to the Meetup Lounge, where starting in a few minutes here at 2 Eastern, presenters will host a networking table on their presentation topic and have the opportunity to answer your questions and engage in conversation. And up to 30 attendees can join a table at one time, and it's easy to hop in and out of tables if you'd like to learn about more than one topic. So please do join the meetup tables and take advantage of this feature. Its interactivity is the main reason we chose this platform to host the summit. And again, to make this transition, you should switch from the agenda tab in AirMeet to the meetup tables tab in the navigation bar. Find the table named after the presentation topic you'd like to learn more about, hover over a chair and hit the join button. So thank you so much again to our fantastic lightning round speakers and to all of you for joining, to our sponsors, host institutions, and nonprofit partners. And we look forward to continuing these conversations over at the meetup tables.